we're about to discuss the text of the conquest, Joshua's conquest, which for many is a painful and problematic part of the scriptures. Before discussing a book like Joshua, we've got to ask a couple of fundamental questions. The first being the question of whether judgment, violence, pain is always necessarily, by definition, bad or evil. C.S. Lewis, for one, wrote a book called The Problem of Pain, in which he argued that to think so, to think that violence is always evil, that pain is always wrong, is ridiculous. We'll need to talk about that. Let's bracket it for the moment. Another major question that we have to ask with violence in the Bible is the question of whether this violence is condoned by the scriptures, and more specifically, whether the violence is actually carried out by God, or whether it's carried out primarily under the initiative and the machinations of the human mind. There is that latter kind of violence in the Bible, but it's much more easy to explain and deal with than the problem of God's violence. But we do have in the Bible cases where God acts violently, such as at the creation, to move in as the divine warrior and to defeat the forces of chaos and evil, splitting the divine chaos monster, Tehom, Tiamat, Rahab, Leviathan, splitting that in two, defeating it in order to create peace, harmony, new life, and rebirth. I want to argue that that is primarily the picture and the meaning of this story of the conquest in Joshua, in the conquest stories of Scripture. The reason that I can argue that is that the text gives us a clear clue that it's the divine warrior, not some sort of human military initiative that's at stake here. Because we've got this symbol, the Ark of the Covenant. It comes in again and again. Now, the Ark of the Covenant has many different significations and meanings in different theological streams of tradition in the Bible, and we'll explore many of those in the course. But for the time being, I want to talk about one primary signification, and that is that the ark symbolizes sacramentally the presence of the divine warrior, God as the creator who violently destroys chaos, destroys Tiamat, destroys Rahab. This happened, we've seen before, at the crossing of the Red Sea, symbolic of chaos being divided, Tiamat being divided. That's why I think often Egypt is referred to as Rahab, the chaos monster, in various texts of the Bible. Because in splitting the sea, God simultaneously defeats the forces of Egypt and Pharaoh, those chaotic, deathly forces that are pursuing them. Egypt is called Rahab in places like Job 9:13, Job 26:12-13, Psalm 89:9-10, Isaiah 51:9-10. The dividing of the Red Sea is specifically referred to as God's defeat of chaos very explicitly in Isaiah 51:9-10, and in other parts of Isaiah as well, probably also in Psalm 74:12, which seems to be alluding in part to the Exodus deliverance in its use of imagery of God's defeat as the divine warrior of chaos. This crossing of the Red Sea is repeated or recapitulated in the conquest as the ark is moved into the middle of the Jordan River and the waters of the Jordan split, just like at the Red Sea. So again, the divine warrior is moving in, about to conquer the land. It's through the ark that Yahweh works as divine warrior, and we're meant to see these stories as God's defeat of chaos, not human land grabbing, human ideology of some sort of manifest destiny. The text specifically forbids that through the ark imagery. As early as the wilderness wanderings, as Israel began to head towards the promised land, head toward occupying that land, the ark is associated with the divine warrior. So in the book of Numbers, chapter 10, verse 35, we're told that whenever Moses ordered the ark to be taken up and the troops to move ahead, Moses cried out, "Arise, O Lord, Let your enemies be scattered, and your foes flee before you. So as the ark processed through the wilderness, it was anticipation of God, the divine warrior, defeating sin, defeating the powers of darkness, and moving ahead in a theological battle, not a human military campaign. In the psalm that we saw pictured at the beginning of this video, we have the same notion. The ark ceremonially paraded around Jerusalem and then brought in through Jerusalem's gates. So that in Psalm 24, verses 7 to 8, the city gates, the temple gates are asked to open up so that the ark, symbolic of God, the divine warrior, can come in. And what does the psalm shout out? The Lord, strong and mighty, mighty in battle. So again, this idea that the ark represents God's initiative in this type of theological warfare. Once the ark is moved into the land and the conquest begins, we have this major story of Jericho, perhaps the best known story in the conquest of Joshua. And what happens there? Again, the ark is instrumental. In Joshua 6, the ark is moved in and paraded around the city with the trumpets blowing, and without humans really participating at all, except ceremonially and liturgically, the ark causes the walls of the city to cave in and the city's defenses to fall and drop to nothing. Later on, still before the monarchy arises, when Israel is in conflict with the Philistines, the same thing happens. As the ark is brought into the Israelite camp in 1 Samuel 4, the Philistines are terrified and they yell out, oh boy, the ark's brought into the camp, divine power is present, the gods are in the military camp, woe to us, nothing like this has ever happened in our experience. This is a major theological event that sends shivers up their spines. So again, just an introduction to the theological and theocentric focus of these stories.